Hey there, friend. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. So glad to have you here today as we continue our study of the Golden Psalm, the first of 6 of these Golden Psalms. And this one, boy, I tell you what, there's so much about the Messiah here. It's a good psalm to study. This is a delight, isn't it? So the Lord, yesterday, He was talking about the inheritance and the cup and the heritage and all the rest. And now today we come to verses 8 and 9. 8 and 9. And we're going to go to the New Testament, because there in the New Testament, Peter quotes from Psalm 16 as he preaches on the day of Pentecost. Now, I'll tell you what. Why don't we read 8 and 9, and then I'll make some comments here. I have set the Lord always before me, because He is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope. All right. Now that's verses 8 and 9 here in Psalm 16. We go over to the New Testament and we listen to Peter as he uses this text in his sermon on the day of Pentecost. But before we go to Peter, let me just remind you of, Let me just remind you of something, a principle of interpreting Scripture. And I'm going to turn to the Savoy Declaration. And in the Savoy Declaration, in the first chapter, the 9th article, we have this: the infallible rule of interpretation of Scripture is Scripture itself, and therefore, when there is a question about the true and full sense of any Scripture, which is not many but one, it must be searched and known by other places that speak more clearly. Okay, so applying this article from the Savoy Declaration to what we're doing here today, which is studying Psalm 16, we study Psalm 16 and we read these two verses, 8 and 9, and then we find that Peter uses these as well on the day of Pentecost. So Peter interprets for us Psalm 16 and tells us what Psalm 16 is all about. So let's turn there to Acts chapter 2. And we're going to read beginning there in verse 25. Acts 2:25. That's where he begins quoting. Actually, I'd like to start reading there in verse 23. Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for He is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover also my flesh shall rest in hope. So Peter quotes Psalm 16 as he is describing the fact that there's no way that Jesus could have stayed in the grave. His resurrection is certain. And I love 23, he accuses them. He says, he was delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, and you've taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. So God had determined it. That's the determinate counsel, that God and the Son and the Spirit in eternity past had made a covenant of grace together, so that the Son would go to the cross. So that's the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. But the people entered into it, and they crucified Him by wicked hands and killed Him. And then he says, whom God hath raised up. Now that's what he's talking about when he comes to Psalm 16. God has raised Him up, because it wasn't possible that he should be held by death. And then he quotes Psalm 16, for David speaks concerning him. I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for He's on my right hand, that I should not be moved. So who's speaking here? This is the Son. He's speaking about not being moved, his flesh resting in hope. And then tomorrow we're going to see in verse 10 how Peter continues this, and he talks about there's no way that the Lord's not going to leave his soul in hell. His Holy One will not see corruption. And there again we have this idea that resurrection is going to happen, because it's not possible that Jesus could be held in the grave, because God had promised in Psalm 16 that that would not take place. Okay, so there's our interpretation. We go to the New Testament and we find it specifically for us here in Acts chapter 2. Now, come back tomorrow. We're going to conclude by looking at verses 10 and 11. So I hope you'll join me then here on Daily Dose Radio.